May 2023, Ukraine received its first British Storm Shadow cruise missiles, long-range precision weapons, capable of striking targets 250 kilometers away, game-changing capability. British military planners expected Ukraine to use them conservatively. High-value strategic targets, command centers, ammunition depots, carefully selected strikes maximizing political and military impact. Ukraine had different plans. Genius tactical employment the British never anticipated. Within weeks, Ukrainian forces were using Storm Shadow in ways that left British defense officials simultaneously shocked and impressed. Tactics so creative, so effective, that the UK is now studying Ukrainian employment to update their own doctrine. This is the story of Ukraine's genius Storm Shadow play and why it changed everything Britain thought they knew about cruise missile warfare. Storm Shadow is an Anglo-French cruise missile, developed jointly by the UK and France. The French call it Scalp EG. Same weapon, different names. The specifications are impressive. Range, over 250 kilometers. Some sources suggest export versions limited to 250 kilometers. Domestic versions reach 560 kilometers. Ukraine likely received a 250 kilometers variant. Warhead, 450 kilogram broach bomb Royal Ordnance Augmented Charge, designed specifically to penetrate hardened targets, bunkers, reinforced structures, underground facilities. Guidance, GPS, INS with terrain reference navigation, pre-programmed flight path, autonomous terminal guidance, fire and forget. Launch aircraft don't need to guide missiles to target. Stealth features, low radar cross-section, flies at low altitude, hugs terrain, difficult to detect and intercept, designed to evade air defenses. Ukraine received Storm Shadow in May 2023. Exact numbers classified. Estimates range from dozens to over 100 missiles, enough for sustained operations but not unlimited supply. Launch platform, Soviet-era Su-24 fighter bombers. Ukraine modified these aircraft to carry and launch Storm Shadow. British and French technicians assisted integration, not a simple process. Soviet aircraft weren't designed for Western weapons. British expectations were clear. Ukraine would use Storm Shadow sparingly against highest value targets. Strategic headquarters, critical infrastructure, ammunition storage facilities deep in Russian territory. Make each missile count. Limited supply means careful targeting. Maximize strategic impact. Ukraine understood the guidance. Then, I completely ignored it. Ukraine's initial Storm Shadow strikes targeted exactly what Britain expected. Strategic facilities deep in occupied territory. The 13th of May 2023. First confirmed Storm Shadow strike. Russian command post in Luhansk. Precision hit, building destroyed. Command staff casualties. Russian communications were disrupted. British analysts nodded approvingly. Exactly the kind of high-value target Storm Shadow was designed for. Strategic impact, degrading Russian command and control. The 16th of May, 2023. Second strike. Ammunition depot near Jankoy in occupied Crimea. Massive secondary explosions. Russian supplies destroyed. Reduced artillery ammunition available for frontline units. Again, British planners approved. Ammunition depots are high-value targets. Destroying them affects Russian operations significantly. But then Ukraine's tactics shifted, and British analysts started seeing something unexpected. The 20th of May, 2023. Storm Shadow strike against Russian air defense radar site. Not strategic headquarters. Not an ammunition depot. Anti-aircraft radar installation. British planners were puzzled. Storm Shadow is an expensive precision weapon. Using it against air defense radar seemed wasteful. Cheaper weapons could accomplish the same mission. But Ukraine knew something Britain didn't initially understand. Destroying that specific radar created a gap in Russian air defense coverage. A gap Ukrainian aircraft could exploit for follow-on strikes. This was the first hint of Ukraine's genius tactical employment. Storm Shadow wasn't just a strike weapon. It was an enabler for broader operations. Ukraine's Storm Shadow employment evolved rapidly. Each strike revealed increasingly sophisticated tactical thinking. The pattern became clear. Ukraine used Storm Shadow to create operational opportunities, not just destroy individual targets, create conditions for follow-on operations. Example, strike Russian air defense system, create a gap in coverage, immediately launch drone strikes through that gap. Hit targets that were previously protected. Russians scramble to restore air defense. Ukraine strikes again somewhere else. Another pattern, strike Russian logistics nodes, not just destroying supplies, forcing Russians to reroute logistics through less efficient paths, slowing their supply chain, creating bottlenecks, then striking those bottlenecks. Ukraine also used Storm Shadow for psychological operations. Strike Russian military facilities in occupied Crimea. Demonstrate that nowhere is safe. Undermine Russian confidence. Force them to disperse forces. Spread thin, defending everywhere. Most innovative, deceptive targeting. Ukraine publicly announced strikes against certain facility types. Russians moved similar facilities, concentrated air defenses around them. Then Ukraine struck completely different targets Russians left undefended. British analysts watched in fascination. This wasn't how Western militaries typically employed cruise missiles. Western doctrine emphasizes destroying specific high-value targets, measuring success by target destruction. Ukrainian doctrine emphasized creating operational advantages, success measured by impact on Russian operations. Not just what was destroyed, what opportunities were created. Ukraine's most brilliant Storm Shadow employment targeted bridges, not randomly, systematically, strategically. Kerch Bridge connects Russia to occupied Crimea, critical logistics route, Russians heavily defended, multiple air defense systems, naval patrols, constant surveillance. Ukraine couldn't destroy Kerch Bridge easily, too large, too well defended, would require multiple missiles, probably wouldn't achieve complete destruction anyway. So Ukraine targeted different bridges, smaller, less defended, but operationally significant. July 2023. Storm Shadow strikes a destroyed bridge near Nova Kakhovka. Russian logistics route severed, forces east of the bridge isolated, supply lines disrupted. August 2023. Another bridge strike. Chonhar Bridge connecting Crimea to the mainland. Damaged but not completely destroyed. Russian traffic was forced to slow. Bottleneck created. British analysts initially questioned the logic. Why not save missiles for higher value targets? Bridges can be repaired. Russians can build pontoon crossings. But Ukraine understood the cumulative effect. Each bridge damaged forced Russians to reroute logistics. Longer routes, more fuel consumed, more time required. More opportunity for Ukrainian strikes against concentrated traffic. And repairing bridges under Ukrainian surveillance is dangerous. Russian engineer units become targets, repair equipment destroyed. Every attempt to fix damage creates opportunities for follow-on strikes. Storm Shadow bridge strikes weren't about permanently cutting routes. They were about forcing Russians into predictable patterns, then exploiting those patterns. Genius. While Ukraine struck bridges and logistics, they also systematically targeted Russian headquarters, but not the way Britain expected. Western doctrine targets top-level headquarters, kills senior leadership, disrupts strategic planning, decapitation strikes. Ukraine targeted middle-level headquarters, brigade and division command posts, battalion assembly areas, forward operating bases. Why? The Russian military structure is highly centralized. Battalion and brigade commanders are critical nodes. Killing them disrupts immediate tactical operations more than killing distant generals. And middle-level headquarters are easier to locate. They communicate more frequently, emit more radio signals. Ukrainian intelligence could identify them through signals intercept and pattern analysis. Storm Shadow gave Ukraine the ability to strike these headquarters before they could relocate. Russian units typically move command posts every 48 to 72 hours. Storm Shadow's range and speed meant Ukraine could strike within hours of identifying its location. The psychological impact was enormous. Russian officers knew Ukrainian missiles could reach them anywhere in occupied territory. That knowledge affected decision-making, made them cautious. reluctant to concentrate forces, afraid to establish fixed command posts. British analysts recognized the brilliance. Rather than trying to kill one general, Ukraine was creating systemic fear among the entire officer corps, degrading Russian command effectiveness across all levels. This was asymmetric warfare at its finest. Limited missile supply achieving outsized psychological and operational effects through smart targeting and tactical creativity. Ukraine's Storm Shadow tactics evolved continuously. Russians adapted. Ukraine adapted to Russian adaptations. Constant tactical innovation cycle. Russians concentrated air defenses around likely targets. Ukraine shifted to hitting targets Russians left undefended. Russians dispersed headquarters and logistics. Ukraine struck concentration points when Russians were forced to mass for operations. Russians improved camouflage and deception. Ukraine developed better intelligence collection to penetrate deception. Each Ukrainian Storm Shadow strike provided intelligence. How did Russians defend? What countermeasures did they employ? Where were their air defense gaps? Ukraine incorporated lessons immediately, adjusted targeting, changed strike patterns, exploited newly discovered vulnerabilities. British military observers were impressed by adaptation speed. Western militaries conduct lengthy analysis, develop new doctrine, train forces on new procedures. The process takes months or years. Ukraine adapted within days, sometimes hours. Battlefield intelligence fed directly to targeting cells. New strike plans developed immediately, executed as soon as opportunity arose. This rapid adaptation cycle multiplied Storm Shadow's effectiveness. Russians couldn't predict Ukrainian targeting, couldn't establish effective defense patterns, constantly reacting, never establishing stable defensive posture. And each successful strike created more intelligence, more understanding of Russian vulnerabilities, more opportunities for exploitation. The cycle reinforced itself. Success bred more success. Russian confusion enabled Ukrainian creativity. Ukrainian creativity increased Russian confusion. British defense officials provided Storm Shadow expecting conventional employment. They got a tactical revolution instead. First shock, creativity. Ukraine used expensive precision weapons as enablers for cheaper systems. Storm Shadow created gaps. Drones exploited gaps. Cost-effective combination Britain hadn't fully appreciated. Second shock, tempo. British doctrine assumes careful, deliberate targeting, days or weeks of planning per strike. Ukraine strikes within hours of target identification. Speed creates opportunities, deliberate planning would miss. Third shock, asymmetric thinking. Britain designs weapons for symmetric conflicts, peer adversaries with similar capabilities. Ukraine faces a larger adversary, uses limited high-end weapons to create disproportionate effects. Tactical creativity, compensating for resource limitations. Fourth shock, adaptation speed. British military culture emphasizes process and procedure. Ukraine's military culture emphasizes results and flexibility. They adapt faster than British planners thought possible. Fifth shock, psychological operations integration. British doctrine separates kinetic strikes from psychological operations. Different planning cells, different approval processes. Ukraine integrates them seamlessly. Every Storm Shadow strike is calculated for both physical and psychological effects. The cumulative effect left the British military studying Ukrainian tactics, considering how to incorporate lessons into UK doctrine, recognizing that smaller forces with limited resources can achieve significant effects through tactical creativity. Ukraine transformed Storm Shadow from strategic strike weapon into tactical enabler. Britain provided the tool. Ukraine rewrote the instruction manual. The UK is shocked by Ukraine's genius Storm Shadow play because Ukraine fundamentally reimagined how to employ the weapon. Britain designed Storm Shadow for strategic strikes against high-value targets. Careful planning, maximum impact per missile. Ukraine uses Storm Shadow tactically, creating opportunities, enabling follow-on operations, forcing Russian adaptations, exploiting Russian reactions. The results speak for themselves. Limited missile supply achieving outsized operational effects. Russian logistics were disrupted. Command and control degraded. air defenses neutralized. Psychological impact is enormous. British military officials are simultaneously impressed and learning. Ukraine demonstrated tactical innovation Britain didn't anticipate. Rapid adaptation, Britain struggles to replicate. Creative employment, maximizing limited resources. This is an asymmetric warfare genius. Taking what you have, using it differently than the enemy expects. Achieving effects beyond resource limitations through creativity and speed. Britain provided Storm Shadow. Ukraine created Storm Shadow doctrine, and in doing so, taught Britain lessons about their own weapon. That's why they're shocked, not disappointed, shocked in the best possible way. If you want more stories about tactical innovation, asymmetric warfare, and how creativity overcomes resource limitations, hit that subscribe button for Battlescope. Don't forget to smash that like button and share this video with anyone interested in modern warfare and military strategy. Drop a comment below. What other weapons has Ukraine employed more creatively than expected? Thanks for watching. Stay sharp, stay informed, and remember, the best weapon is the one used in ways your enemy doesn't expect.